Hey guys, how you doing? Boy, howdy, am I not having any luck with recording these last couple of days. I pushed my luck too far, and I reached my maximum file size, and then it deleted the video that I was doing, so that's frustrating. Um, so just know this is my second whack at this, okay? Um, I'll very briefly I'll talk. Doug Ford finally did push through, so people are going to stop going into retail establishments. I think it's an improvement. Should have happened 2 weeks ago. I still don't support the Ford administration. Yabba yabba yabba. You guys all know that. It's not what I want to talk about today. I talk politics a lot. I want to talk about something a little bit more flooby, a little bit more flooby floob. So be warned, right? I'm getting into existential weeds because I think now is a time to be getting into existential weeds, right? Like, we're not allowed to be existential beings, really. Capitalism commodifies all life, treats people as useful or useless, right? Divides us into little categories, and insists that that must be the case. And I don't view the world that way. And I think it's because of my religious upbringing and my journey through a spiritual life that I have this sort of core central way of looking at the world, where, like, fundamentally stated, I see us all as equal, right? When you say this, pro-capitalist supporters kind of scoff and be like, "Oh, of course, people aren't equal to one another, right? Like that, you put two basketball teams together, one wins, bobblehead," because they have such a narrow-minded view of the world that they have commodified things, that people are only worth what their value is to capitalists. Or to the speaker, right? That if you're a pro-capitalist speaker and you're like, "Oh, there's a winner and there's a loser, and one's better than the other, obviously." But if you didn't have a loser, you wouldn't have a game, right? If you didn't have a loser, you wouldn't have a game. And so I really want to walk through that. I'm going to warn you now. We're getting deep into religious, spiritual, existential kind of Hoob weeds. If you can't hack that, just don't watch the video. Just don't. Just skip it. It's fine. But what I am going to be talking about is, like, the central core of how I view the world and how I view this plane of existence. Yeah, I'm just going to talk about it. So, growing up, I was raised evangelical Christian. Of course, I've rejected that tradition. I see them as heretics now. The evangelical Christians have a heretical view of their own texts, and they don't treat their own God with any respect whatsoever. They don't really actually care about Christ or God. They care about capitalism. They've been completely taken over by capitalists. They don't actually have a religious critique of capitalism, which, I mean, Christ had a religious critique of capitalism for sure. Just read the book. But still, that's the tradition I came from, and from there, I went through the new atheist movement, right? And I was on the religious side of the conversation. I watched every single debate that was given, that a new atheist was involved in. So that's Sam Harris, Christopher Hitchens, Dawkins, Dennett. I listened to every single one they had. And what was frustrating for me going through those debates is that, for the most part, I found that they were delving into a semantic argument. And that semantic argument fundamentally stems from asking the question, does God exist? Right? Does God exist? And it's frustrating because this semantic way of this question spawns semantics, right? Well, what do we mean when we're talking about God? What is God? So, and it really, in all those debates, there really was only one person on the theological side that actually had the theological backing to answer the question with any veracity, right? And that was, I forget his name, but he was the archbishop, who's the leader of the Anglican Church. He's the Anglican Pope. And he said in his debate with Dawkins, like, that God is the force of all energy. He's synonymous with the universe. To which Dawkins responded, well, then why do you need him? Like, what's the point of having this God figure? And I think it is of importance, right? Because fundamentally, the actual question that we should be asking, right? And this question is much more interesting to me because I think it plants people's feet a little bit better and avoids the semantic conversation, right? If God is synonymous to the universe, which is something, incidentally, that Isaac Newton said, right? Isaac Newton wrote a theological tract about the nature of God, and because he was a believer in God, and he defined God as the collection of all things. So in that way, it's synonymous with the universe, right? And when we say, and theologians should start saying the universe when they're referring to God. Like, God can take it. God's been called all kinds of things. You can call God the universe. He's fine with it. I should say it's fine with it. God has no gender. Sorry, that's a holdover. So the question we should be asking then, like, if we acknowledge, okay, the universe, great. Is the universe sentient? That, to me, is a very interesting question to ask. Because it completely avoids the semantic argument. It completely avoids the theological argument as well. Like, it really sidesteps a massive amount of conversation, right? And just cuts to the heart. And you can ask anybody that question. Hey, do you think the universe is sentient? Right? We live in the universe. It's here. It's big. It's vast. It's full of everything. Do you think it's sentient? And I generally say that it is, right? It's very difficult for me to believe that we are sentient, but the system that spawned us is not, right? Like, it's very difficult for me to believe that. I do believe in that sort of ancient Greek principle, which is so above as below, right? That if there is a universal principle that we can observe within our own plane of existence, that does carry upwards or downwards or side to side or wherever, through other planes of existence, and that makes a type of sense. That if we can observe something as universally true here, then it should be universally true of the Creator, right? That the Creator itself is universally affected by our own universal rules. What I want to talk about there. Right. One of the things I think, like, again, talking about the secular ancient Greeks and their thinking about why is there something rather than nothing? How did things come to be? And their answer, as well as the answer of the Enlightenment scientists, simply was that there must be some kind of base energy that is the antithesis of this. That if we are motion and force and all of this, there must have been a period of time where there was total stillness and a perfect nothingness, so still and so perfect that we cannot even imagine it. That it is difficult for us to contemplate upon it, right? This is why people say meditation and prayer and all this kind of stuff is very important, because it lets us dwell on stillness and nothingness, which is the true nature of the prime energy, or God, if you choose. And that this energy must have shifted from like a non-sentient form to a sentient form. And in this moment, it must have abided by one of the universal principles that we can observe here on this plane of reality. That universal principle being that when something is birthed into this reality, it immediately begins to discover what it's capable of, right? It begins to answer what I call the prime question, the primal question. What are we capable of, right? It's not like when a baby comes out, like when a deer comes out of his mother, it's not going, oh, what am I capable of doing? Let me see. Oh, I have a leg. Oh my goodness, right? It's not doing that. what it's doing is it's just automatically and instinctually built into its core, discovering that it has these legs and that it can move and that it can do these things, right? It's intrinsic to the nature of life, and all life follows this extremely basic universal truth. Is there a life form that exists that does not do this? And so if that's true of everything that you observe in your own reality, well, it's safe to assume that it's true of the creative force as well. And if the creative force shifts from nothing to something to attain consciousness and asks the question of itself, what am I capable of doing? When what it's capable of doing is creating everything that's logically possible to be created, then it immediately creates everything that is logically possible to be created. And it just does that because that's what it's capable of doing. It doesn't think about it. It doesn't go like, oh, well, I can't do that because that would have this of it. It doesn't think that way. It creates it because it's possible to be created. And things exist because they are possible to exist. I fundamentally think that this way of thinking solves the problem of evil, right? That God is not creating evil on purpose. That it's only after it's created that God can look at it and be like, oh, wow, these beings I created to experience this thing certainly don't like it, and they definitely don't like me for having put them through it and having created it, right? Like, why would they? Take something horrible like the Holocaust, right? At the Holocaust, people were saying that God doesn't exist and that they were decrying God for having put them through this. But let's say God wanted to just eliminate that moment. How would it do that? How could it do that? Right? It couldn't just scrub it out with its thumb. Can't just say, okay, that shouldn't exist, goodbye. Because in order to do that, it would need to scrub it out from its own memory and all references of it and everything like that. But the second it would do that, it would leave a gap that it wouldn't understand why there was a gap, right? And because there's a gap that it doesn't understand why there's a gap, then it would create something to fill that gap and thereby recreate the Holocaust. And it would just have to do that. And so for all we know, God is in this sort of perpetual state of trying to scrub things out, but it can't, because it would scrub it out and then immediately recreate it simply by the force of its being, because that's what it's capable of doing. That's what it does, right? It's not, and it's not doing this out of a conscious decision or a conscious choice. It's just doing it because that's what it is. Right? In many ways, I think it's actually quite horrible. It's actually quite a horrible state that God finds itself in, that it's created these absolute abominations and absolute horrors that it can't eliminate from its own sight, that it exists in the body of God because it must, because it can. And that if a creature like God wanted to actually change and try to make these things stop or try to alter them so that they could no longer happen, the only way that it would be able to do it is to influence the beings who are being inflicted by it in such a way that they themselves begin to prevent them, right? That instead of us just perpetuating Holocaust after Holocaust after Holocaust, that we find a way to prevent further Holocausts and that we find a way to stop them from occurring. Right? Because, and here's where things get really fascinating to me, because in like that Carl Sagan kind of way of thinking about the universe and the world, like we are all stardust, right? Well, we are all of the creative energy of God, right? We exist as a creative force. I am made of God and by God, and you are made of God and by God, and in that way, we do share a form of equality, right? Because we are equal in the eyes of our Creator, in the eyes of God. We have equal value, certainly. And what are we doing, right? What is it that a being like God would like us to do, right? Well, to discuss amongst one another, what is this? Why are we here? What are we doing? These are very interesting questions to each other, And we listen and we discuss and we have these kinds of conversations with each other, and we find them very interesting because they are fundamentally questions about God. And if once you accept that you are a divine being, and so you should have some self-esteem about yourself because you are a divine being propped up by the creative energy of the force of God, and so is anyone you talk to and any creature you interact with, and the trees, right? Any living organism, any non-living organism in many ways. Like they're all created and all have equal value in the body of God. And this is why capitalism can't think this way. This is why capitalism is ultimately a demonic force that needs to be prevented and stopped. Because capitalism commodifies and uses people. It separates people into categories like useful or not useful, of worth, no worth, right? While simultaneously its acolytes and followers try to ascend themselves into a form of godhood, right? That they see themselves as moral beings simply because they have attained great wealth, without realizing that wealth to God is of no value whatsoever, right? They die the same way, right? We all die the same way. And in many ways, this is very humbling. It's very humbling to kind of come to this conclusion that you are of equal value, like to the highest form of energy and the highest being that exists in all of creation, which is God. You are of equal value as your dog, right? That you both are sharing space in this plane of existence, attempting to discover what it is you're here for, what it is you're capable of doing. And also, I think it's important to state that by doing that, this is how God discovers about itself, right? God doesn't have anybody to talk to, right? We are God talking about God, right? And we're constantly learning and sharing and figuring stuff out about our own creation and our own creator. And why are we here? What are we doing? And it is through this process, and this is the only way it can happen. It's through this process that God learns about itself. And so people wonder, like, oh, what's the meaning of life? Well, the meaning of life is to attempt to discover the meaning of life. That's it. Because through these discussions, you are engaging in the prime divine act. That divine creatures created by God and of God discuss and attempt to figure out what it is God is and why we are here. And we've become so detached from this idea that we are of nature and of creation itself. I remember there was this one time Neil deGrasse Tyson said on Twitter, "We live in an uncaring universe." And Norm Macdonald, of all people, corrected him and said, well, that's actually not true, because humans are of this universe and humans care. And so there's a portion of the universe that does care. And it's an astute observation to make, because if you think that there are simply people who are better than other people, right, in a commodified sort of a way, well, then you stand against God, because God doesn't give a shit about any of that. All this stuff that we've built and all these things and all these totems and all these artifacts and all the piles of money and all that kind of stuff, it doesn't matter at all to him, to them, to it. It doesn't matter at all, right? God will wipe it all away. It will all return to God. It doesn't have value. What has value is the knowledge of what we're doing here and why we're here. And so fundamentally, when you're talking to somebody, I'm going to close this out real quick. When we're talking to somebody, you are talking to an aspect of the divine. You are talking to an aspect of God. And so you should talk with respect, reverence, kindness, certainly, attempting to learn something about that person, because if you learn something about that person, then you are learning something about God, and perhaps you can learn something about yourself which incidentally, if you learn something about yourself, you're also learning something about God. And this, to me, is the most important thing for us to do. This is my central tenet, that we are all aspects of the Creator. And by reaching out and helping another person or another creature, you are helping the prime energy of God itself. And that is what is virtuous. That we do live in a state of true equality when we recognize that we are, all of us, even the people you think are degenerate, like castaways or not hireable, which seems to be the only thing that matters to capitalists. We are all equal with them. Their opinion or the way they view the world is just as valid as yours. And to approach each other with that kind of understanding and that kind of intrinsic care would fundamentally alter the way that we deal with each other and fundamentally alter how everything works. I saw all of this articulated on the internet one time in a way that was very clean. A teacher says to his 500 students, "I've filled 500 balloons with air and put them in the gymnasium. Each balloon has your name on it. You have an hour. Everyone find the balloon that has your own name on it." After an hour, not a single student had found their balloon. And so the teacher said, "Okay, now pick up the first balloon you see and give it to the person it belongs to." Within 5 minutes, everyone had their balloon. And I think that that's very poignant. I think that's a very pointed way of encapsulating what I'm talking about. That if it's every man for themselves, i.e. capitalism, then nothing will be accomplished. Nothing of value, certainly. But if it's every man look out for the person next to them, or every man look out, or every person look out for the person, every person solve another person's problem, well, then we get somewhere. And that's what we should do. We should talk to each other and care about each other and care about your neighbor as if you are caring about God themselves. Because you are. Because you are. All right, guys, that's enough of that. If you made it this far and you didn't turn me off, just subscribe. Just do it. I'm so close to 70. Let's do it. This one was a bit hooby-jooby, but that's okay. It's okay to get a bit hooby-jooby sometimes. I love you all, guys. Like, share, subscribe. Get a friend to subscribe to me. Just, you know, I just really want to hit that 70, guys. That's all. All right. I love you all. Good luck.